Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Hack, and in this video you're checking out a brand new solo Necromancer build for the Elder Scrolls Online. Now not only is this a solo build, it's also a hybrid build, which means we're mixing both stamina and magicka abilities for a pretty unique combination of skills and just a really fun playstyle. Of course, as a solo build, we've got great survivability, great healing, great damage. So if you're looking for something different, something to help you solo world bosses, dungeons, even veteran dungeons if you want, and you want to do it on the Necromancer, then this is going to be the video for you. As usual, we'll check out the stats, the gear sets, the skill options, champion points, we'll talk about the outfit style, and more coming up next. Alright, so here we are on the hybrid Necromancer solo PvE build. We'll jump into the stats right here, but just keep in mind, of course, this is a solo build. This is not a pure DPS build for the Elder Scrolls Online, so we'll talk a little bit about the defensives, how you maintain your health, how you maintain your buffs, and of course, talking about the hybrid setup, which is a mixture of both stamina and magicka abilities to make for a pretty interesting and pretty unique build, I think. So let's go ahead and buff up our stats here. Use a potion as well just to check out the basic stats on the build. 23,000 max magicka, 21,000 max health, 23,000 max stamina. Of course, we are splitting our health and stamina and magicka pretty evenly across the board. On our Necromancer, the recoveries are actually pretty nice. Thanks to some of the passives, we have about 1,100 magicka recovery, almost 1,300 stamina recovery, 400 health recovery. Our weapon damage with rally up sits at a pretty solid 5,200. Of course, that's spell damage as well, considering this is a hybrid build. And then with some of the additional buffs that we have, like Berserker Enchant and stuff like that, we can get up close to 6,000, so about 5,800, both weapon and spell damage on the build. So we'll talk about how we get there in just a minute. In terms of the defensives, we are running a slightly lower resistance. That's because this is a medium armor build, so sitting at about 17,000 spell and physical resistance. That's fully buffed with our skeletal armor. Now, as far as my points, I am putting, like we said, a pretty even split here. 34 points into max magicka, 30 points into stamina. I'm using the Warrior Mundus this time. A couple reasons. One of them is I am doing a weapon damage stack, trying to get my weapon damage as high as possible on this build. And usually I recommend the Lover Mundus, but the nice thing about the Necromancer class is they do have that graveyard ability that gives you basically the same passive resistance debuffs as the Lover Mundus. You can get Major Breach and Major Fracture pretty easily as a Necromancer. Of course, I am using the Tri-Stat Food. That's going to be your best in slot for any type of hybrid build, in my opinion. And you can run the Purple Food, which I have here. Also, if you have access to the Gold Bewitched Sugar Skulls, you can run that as well for a little bit more bonus stats. Let's see what else. In terms of the potion, you do want Tri-Stat potions if you can afford it. That's going to give you a nice return on all your resources. And then in terms of the race, the way that I set this up, any race that has a good weapon damage buff is going to be very nice. I've chosen the Orc for this setup. We get the nice 2,000 max stamina. We get 1,000 extra health, which is very nice. We get some health back when doing weapon abilities, and of course the 258 weapon damage. Get some nice bonus movement speed here as well. You can make any race that you want work. It's just sort of a matter of preference, I think. So I think that covers the basics. Let's jump into the gear sets next. And starting with our front bar weapon, first 5-piece set I decided to use here is going to be New Moon Acolyte. The New Moon Acolyte set gives us a lot of really nice stats for any type of hybrid setup. Even a standard build in ESO, you get weapon critical, spell critical, weapon damage, spell damage. You get physical penetration, spell penetration. And then, of course, the 481 weapon and spell damage, with the negative effect that you do increase the cost of your active abilities by 5%. Now, I really don't see this to be a big issue as far as the cost increase. The nice thing we have access to as a hybrid is we're using abilities from both pools, kind of alternating, and so our sustain is actually really good. Plus, if you're running Tri-Stat potions, your sustain will be even better. So the downside doesn't really play that difficult on the Necro. Now, the reason why I like this, of course, is all the juicy stats, but this also gives me a fairly high weapon damage boost on the 5-piece. And as I mentioned before, I am playing a weapon damage stack on this build. This is a medium armor build, for example, so I'm stacking the major brutality from Rally. I'm stacking the 481 weapon damage from this, the medium armor passives, the weapon damage passives of Orc. So it's just a nice way to stack weapon damage, I think. Yes, you have other options. You could run something like the Warrior's Fury set. That gives you about 600 weapon damage, so you could potentially get even higher damage on this build if you wanted to. But the nice upside of this is that you have that 481 weapon damage all the time. You don't have to build it up by getting hit. So I'm going to run that on the front bar. That's going to be with a two-handed Greatsword. Greatsword is very good for any type of hybrid build. That's because you get both weapon and spell damage bonus from having a Greatsword equipped. That's basically a 5% bonus damage across the board. Doesn't matter if the skill is stamina-based or magicka-based. You'll still get a bigger tooltip if you're running a Greatsword versus something like an axe or a maul. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, I have the Hardening enchantment. I talked about this in my video over the weekend about damage shield enchants and kind of how those can play into your build if you're soloing in ESO. I think the damage shield enchant's a really nice option. You can see we get a 4,000 damage shield for 5 seconds. Obviously, if you switch from Nirnhoned, which I have now, over to Infused, you can get an even bigger damage shield, but I found I didn't really need it, and I preferred the extra damage. So our weapon is going to count for 2 pieces, of course, because it is a two-handed weapon. And then we are just running 3 pieces on the jewelry, so that's neck and 2 rings, also of New Moon Acolyte. Now your best in slot trait will be Infused on this build, and again, that's to achieve that high weapon damage stack. I have the Infused trait on all 3 pieces, all 3 with weapon damage, so that's going to get our damage as high as possible in terms of that jewelry. For our second 5 piece, you probably guessed it, since this is a hybrid build and I have equal weapon damage and spell damage. Of course, I'm running the Palinal set to make that happen. You can see the 5-piece bonus here. Your spell and weapon damage become the highest of the 2 values. We also get some nice max health and some stamina and magicka recovery. So basically, when I, pop my rally, since I have medium armor passives and things like that, the weapon damage that I have transfers over to spell damage, and those 2 values become equal. So this is really nice for hybrids, of course, because your magicka abilities will hit harder, as well as your stamina abilities. So it is a really good hybrid set just to have, around if you're interested in this hybrid playstyle. I definitely would invest in a set of Palinals. You could even have somebody craft it for you. But I am running 5 of Palinals on the body here. So I've got the medium boots, medium legs, medium hands. I have a light waist and a heavy chest. Now, as far as the different weights there, why do I have the heavy chest and the light waist? Well, this is going to give me access to that 511 Undaunted passive. Gives us 6% bonus stats across the board, which is going to be really nice for a hybrid setup. Of course, chest has the most armor in the game, so having your heavy piece as the chest piece really makes sense if you can do it that way, as well as your light piece being the waist, because that has the lowest amount of armor, so you're losing the least amount of armor stats overall, having it set up that way. So in terms of the glyphs, yes, you could do tri-stat enchants, but as a Necromancer, we have some bonus health already. So I felt like I didn't really need the health from tri-stat enchants. I'm well over 20k health, which is really solid. So I have magicka on my 5 Palinals, and then I'll run stamina on the monster set. Now, in terms of the trait, though, that is very important. You do want Divines. That, of course, is going to maximize our Mundus Stone benefit. That means we get the most weapon damage possible, which, of course, equals spell damage since we are running the Palinal set. So make sure you pick this up in Divines. That's going to be best for your PvE solo build. Now, in terms of the Monster Helm, you have some options here. Some of you may be surprised, but I did go back to Iceheart on this set. Part of it is just thematic. I mean, I like the sort of the witch feel that this build has. I can do frost damage, I can do shock damage, I can do flame damage. We'll talk about all that when we get to the abilities. So thematically, I think it's kind of cool for a Necromancer build still to run Iceheart. Of course, you get the ice damage. You get the damage shield and some extra spell critical. The spell critical is really nice because we have lower spell critical than usual because we're running medium armor, not light armor. Now, yes, it was nerfed as far as the damage shield. I can get it slightly over 6k. That's with my champion points active, which still really is not too bad, considering we are going to mix this in with a damage shield enchant. Plus, I am running Brawler, so there's a shield there. I also have a passive damage shield from the Psijic Order, so 4 shields in total. You're really not going to notice the shield nerf that much when you build for shields like I have in this case. So Is it viable? I think on some builds like this one it is, and it's a nice little cushion in terms of keeping your build alive. So I still recommend it on some builds, but you do have options. Obviously, you can run more of a defensive set if you want to run something like Bloodspawn. You can run some more offensive sets if you want. Something kind of fun, which you might consider that you might not have thought of when running a Necromancer, is actually the Alhambra set. This was fun. I played around with this for a little bit because this procs 2 times possibly, either off of flame damage or shock damage. And the way I've run this build, I have access to both of those. So you can potentially get both Alhambris procs to happen at once. Kind of cool. Another really nice option, if you have access to it, is going to be the Thorvakin set. This gives your enemy minor maim, so that's going to decrease the damage that they do by 15%. And it's very easy to get this. It's just whenever you take damage, you kind of proc that glowing pool on the ground. But like I said, I'm just running the Ice Heart set for now. That's going to be medium as well, so that makes sure we have 5 pieces of medium overall. Of course, that's Divines. That's going to be the best in slot trait, and I just have 2 stamina enchants here to round out my stats. Now, the only thing we haven't talked about is the back bar. Now, I just want to mention that you can run New Moon Acolyte as the back bar staff, but you actually don't have to. The way I've set it up is I have some of my more costly abilities on the back bar. And so I decided just to not run New Moon Acolyte. You can literally run any staff that you want on the back bar. A great option, of course, if you have access to it, is going to be the Maelstrom staff. I have a Maelstrom Inferno staff here. This just gives me a nice little buff to my light and heavy attacks. It's not necessary, it's not needed, but it's a little bit extra damage if you happen to have this. Of course, if you don't, that's totally fine. You could run something like a Willpower staff for more max magicka. You could run maybe a defensive staff with an armor bonus. Something like Death's Wind you can craft. I think it's like 2 or 3 pieces to craft. You can get a little bit of extra armor on your back bar. So it doesn't make a huge difference either way. Obviously, if you have the Maelstrom staff, it's going to give you slightly more damage. The main thing that you want, though, of course, is you want that infused glyph, that infused Berserker glyph, I should say, on the back bar, because that's going to give you close to 600 weapon and spell damage every 5 seconds, thanks to that infused trait. So very important that you have an infused trait for your back bar staff, and then the Berserker enchant. As far as the type of staff, I just went with Fire Staff. Like I said, I wanted to kind of represent every element I could on this build. Shock, Fire, and Frost. But you could totally make do with a Frost Staff or a Lightning Staff. Whatever you happen to have here, it's not a huge difference either way. So I think that covers the gear. Let's go ahead and switch over to our skills next. So this is a 2-hand front bar and then a Inferno Staff back bar. Starting with our 2-handed front bar, we're going to go with Reverse Slice as our first ability. This, of course, comes from the 2-handed skill line. Is the second to last ability you get. Morphed it to Reverse Slice, and the reason just is for some extra AoE splash damage. You can also use the other morph, Executioner, for more single target damage. But I just find when you're going through a dungeon solo, you're trying to clear your way through delves or public dungeons or things like that, the extra splash damage is going to be very nice. For our second ability, we're using Brawler, of course. This is a staple skill of any solo build as far as using the 2-hander. This is going to be the 3rd skill you get in the 2-handed skill line. And you definitely want to morph it to Brawler because this gives us a juicy damage shield. You can see over 6k damage shield just at base. And that does actually scale up to 300% the more enemies that you hit. So with a full stack of enemies, this can easily, give you more damage shield than you have health, which is really nice. Next up, we're going to get into some of the more Necromancer-specific abilities. We've got Mystic Siphon on the front bar. This is a really interesting ability. And even on the hybrid build, it has a very nice tooltip for a damage over time. You can see 20,000 shock damage. Let's see, that probably goes up quite a bit too. 22,000 shock damage, fully buff there. So this is from the Gravelord skill line. It's the last skill that you get. And you can morph this to either like a magicka focus morph, or you can do more of like a disease or stamina focus morph. Now I do like the Mystic Siphon morph in this case because you can see there, it restores magicka every second for 12 seconds. So it's kind of a nice source of sustain on the build. Of course, we are using magicka and stamina-based abilities. So I found that this was really nice for sustain and also just does a ton of AoE dot damage. So really, really nice. You can see it also gives us a bonus 3% damage done on our front bar, So that makes sense to front bar that one. Next up, we've got Blighted Blast Bones. This is also from the Gravelord skill line. It's the second ability that you get. And I've decided to morph this to the Stamina Morph. Now, it really doesn't matter. As a hybrid build, you can run either the Magicka or Stamina Morph. I just felt like my stamina drain was a little bit less. So I had some extra stamina left over where I could really cast this as much as I wanted to. You can see it does decent AoE damage. It does an explosion, so that will hit multiple targets. In PvE, you don't really get much from the Major Defile. That's kind of just an extra thing. But this also creates a corpse on death. So let's talk about the corpse mechanics for a second. For some of these abilities, like for example, your Mystic Siphon, you actually need a corpse to get Mystic Siphon to work. So one of the ways you do that is by, of course, using your Blast Bones. So you can summon your Blast Bones on the target. It will hit them, explode. It'll put that corpse on the ground, and then right away you can cast your Mystic Siphon and get that ability to go right afterwards. So for that reason, you do want to keep the Blast Bones up as often as possible. We'll see we do get some corpses from our back bar, though, as well. Now, next up, we have Rally. This is also from the two-handed skill line. It is the last ability you get. I prefer the Rally Morph, of course, because this does give a burst heal. And the longer you let the buff last, the greater the heal will be. Now, we also have some very nice passive healing on the Necromancer, so you really don't need this very much. Really, the key for this is it does give us that first buff you see there, Major Brutality. That's going to increase our weapon damage by 20%. And kind of the sad thing really about Necromancer is they have no class-based Major Brutality or Major Sorcery. I think that's a huge issue with the class, but that's one of the reasons why I decided to run this mainly as a medium armor weapon stack build, is I needed a way to get Major Brutality, and so Rally really does that very well. You can see we also get Minor Endurance, so that's some increased stamina recovery. So just make sure this is up all the time. That's going to make sure your weapon and your spell damage is as high as possible. Of course, for the ultimate, I usually recommend Temporal Guard as a front bar ultimate if you're soloing, and that's just because we gain minor protection passively, you can see there, by having it slotted. So, 9 out of 10 times I'm not going to use this ultimate. I'll use my back bar ultimate instead, but I do get some nice passive buffs from that. Of course, we also talked about the damage shield that you get passively from having that slotted as well, so that's another great reason to run that. Of course, you do need the Psijic Order skill line to use Temporal Guard. That is from the Somerset chapter, so you will need to have access to that. And if you don't, some other options would be like maybe you could run Dawnbreaker on the front bar. That will increase your weapon and spell damage even more. Of course, you could always run the Necromancer Colossus on the front bar. That gives you some bonus crit. So you do have options, but probably the best ultimate as far as soloing on the front bar is going to be Temporal Guard. So that covers the two-hand bar. Let's go ahead and swap to our Flame Staff back bar. We're going to run Unnerving Boneyard as the first ability here. This comes from the Gravelord's skill line. This is going to be the third ability. And we want to morph it to Unnerving Boneyard because this gives us both Major Breach and Major Fracture. This is an AoE, so you can cast it basically in an area where you're standing. It looks like that. And then anything that comes into contact with this area, it's going to get that ice damage, but also it's going to get that Major Breach and Major Fracture debuff that reduces their spell and physical resistance at the same time. So this is really just an ideal skill for a hybrid style build because you have both physical and magical damage types. And so this is going to make all of your abilities basically hit harder. So it's really important to maintain this every 10 seconds. A fun little mechanic here is you can also increase the damage dealt by this ability. You can see there if you have a corpse on the ground. So something I will do sometimes is just cast my Blast Bones first, make sure that corpse hits the ground, and then hit my Boneyard right away, and that means it's going to do even more damage over time. And next up we have Blockade of Fire. This is from the Destruction Staff skill line. That's the second ability that you get. We're going to morph it to Elemental Blockade. That's because it lasts a little bit longer. It has a larger radius. It just makes it easier to hit enemies. Now, the damage isn't really that significant. The reason why we need this is it gives us that Major Berserker enchant. It basically procs our weapon damage enchant from the back bar. So as long as you have this up, you will also have up that Berserker enchant. It's 452, but it does scale up with major brutality, so we're getting closer to about 600 weapon and spell damage from just having this up every 14 seconds. So that's extremely important as far as maintaining your buffs. Make sure you keep up that wall of elements. The next up, we've got another siphon skill, one of those unique Necromancer siphons. This one is called Mortal Coil. Now this comes from the Living Death skill line. It's the last ability you get here. Now I talked about the passive healing of the Necromancer, and check out this healing. 15,000 health back over 12 seconds. This is a really, really nice heal over time. And not to mention that, we also get stamina back. So we mentioned before, I have Mystic Siphon on the front bar. This is giving me Magicka back. I'm also running Mortal Coil on the back bar. That's giving me stamina back. So as far as sustaining this hybrid build, I have both resources coming in constantly, which is really nice. It does increase your healing done on the back bar. Not a huge deal, just 3% there. But I definitely recommend this ability. Of course, this is a siphon. It is a tether, so you do need a corpse to cast this as well. You cannot share the same corpse from your Mystic Siphon. You'll need to have basically 2 corpses. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, speaking of corpses, our 2 buffs here also generate corpses for the Necromancer build, so that is nice. We've got Beckoning Armor next. That's the second ability you get in Bone Tyrant. You can really choose either morph here. The other morph gives you reduced cost of your summons. So like your Blast Bones, that'll be under 1,000 cost. You could do that if you want. But I really like the Beckoning Armor morph. That's because it basically pulls in any ranged attacker. So, you know, those pesky mages, those pesky archers that stand out far away from you and you have to run in to hit them. This will actually pull them in every 3 seconds. That's actually a really nice effect when you're soloing. Of course, though, we really want it for the major resolve buff that increases our physical and spell resistance by 50 to 80. That's very important as well. Plus, this does create a corpse when the effect ends. So that's another way that you can proc your siphons. Now, our last normal ability here is going to be the Spirit Guardian. This is from that Living Death skill line. Spirit Guardian, that's the second to last ability you get. I prefer this Spirit Guardian morph. It does less healing overall, but you can see there, while active, 10% of the damage you take is transferred to the Spirit instead. And that is a huge, huge bonus when you're soloing. I mean, we already talked about we have the minor protection available on the front bar through our Temporal Guard. So that's 8%. Combine that with your Spirit Guardian. That's another 10%. So we have close to 20% just pure damage reduction just from having those 2 buffs active, which is really, really key for surviving when you're solo, especially on a medium armor build like this one is. So I find that with my Spirit Guardian active, not only do I get a decent heal, but I get that really nice damage mitigation, which is awesome. You also create a Corpse on Death here, so you can use that for something like your summons to keep those active. Now for the ultimate, of course, you want to run Colossus. I don't think it makes a huge difference as far as what morph you choose to run. So I just went with the Pestilent Colossus here. This gives bonus damage on each smash. So basically each smash does more damage. I think the other morph gives a stun at the end, so that can be nice too for dungeons and killing your way through trash mobs and stuff like that. Of course, this does deal major vulnerability for 8 seconds. So that means your enemy is going to take 30% more damage. So that's something you want to think about. You want to make sure you have all of your damage over time effects on before you hit them with a smash. That way you get the most damage out of those as possible. So that's our abilities. Let's talk about passives next. What are the most important passives for the Necromancer class if you're soloing? A lot of very good passives overall in the class skill lines. In the Gravelord tree, reusable parts, this gives you reduced cost on your Blast Bones, which is very nice. You saw that's had a super low cost. Then Death Knell. This passive is amazing. It gives you critical strike chance when your enemy is basically in execute range, so 25% health or less. And that increases by 10% for each Gravelord ability slotted. So I have 2 Gravelord abilities. That means my crit chance jumps up 20%. That's both spell and weapon critical. That's both for spell and weapon critical, so that's really nice on the hybrid setup. Dismember, you also get spell and physical resistance, also very nice for a hybrid build, but you do need a Gravelord ability active. So that's something like just having your graveyard on the ground, for example. That will proc that Dismember passive, And then Rapid Rot, we actually get increased damage done with damage over time effects. So those siphons that we have access to, our Wall of Elements, the Graveyard, all that stuff gets buffed by the Rapid Rot passive, so that's really cool. Under Bone Tyrant, these are more of our tanking abilities. Some sustain as well, so Death Gleaning, you get 200 stamina and magicka back when an enemy dies. Really nice passive. Disdain Harm, you get reduced damage taken if you happen to have a dot effect on you, which is not bad. Health Avarice, you get some healing received, not really a big deal. But Last Gasp is really nice for soloing. You can see that increases your health by 1250, basically for doing nothing. So make sure you pick up that one. And then under our Living Death skill line, when you have a negative effect on you, your healing done is increased by 8%. That's really nice. Near death, this is critical healing. Not a big deal. You shouldn't be near death that much on this build anyways. But Corpse Consumption is nice because you can generate a lot of ultimates on the Necromancer. Then Undead Confederate is a very, very strong passive. You can see when you have one of those summons active, you get 200 bonus stamina and magicka recovery. So you need to keep your Spirit Mender up. That's going to be the easiest way to proc that. In terms of weapon skills, of course, you want all your two-hand passive skills. You get stuff like reduce cost. Of course, the swords increase your damage. You get 30% stamina recovery after killing a target. That's huge. Make sure you pick up the Battle Rush passive. It's very powerful. Of course, we do have Destruction Staff, so you want to unlock all of these as well. Very important. Since I am doing 511, you can get some passives here from both light and heavy armor. Of course, this is a medium armor build, so you'll want all of your medium armor passives. But under light armor, you'll want Grace, Evocation, Spell Warding. You can get some bonuses from these. Under heavy armor, you'll want Resolve, Constitution, and Juggernaut. You can see I'm getting passives from all of these as well. Medium armor, basically the best one was the Agility passive. We talked about the fact that medium armor builds get that bonus weapon damage, which makes the weapon damage stack really work for a hybrid build, and that's through the Agility passive, so make sure you have 2 points into Agility. Fighters Guild, these are great, especially if you're using Dawnbreaker on the front bar. If not, all you really need is Banish the Wicked. This gives you 9 ultimate back when killing undead. Mages Guild, we're not using these. Psijic Order, we are using the ultimate. If you happen to have that skill line, you'll definitely want this passive, second to last passive, called Concentrated Barrier. This makes it so that when you block, you get that 6150 damage shield. Of course, it's because I have some champion points into damage shield strength. At base, that's going to be just 5,000, but still, this is a free damage shield anytime you block. I mean, just think about it. If you're soloing a world boss or something like that, you should be blocking when they heavy attack anyways. So that's going to basically erase some of that damage coming in for free. That's a really great passive for soloing. Undaunted, we talked about the 511. If you have this passive, you get 6% bonus magicka, stamina, and health, which is really good. Under Alliance and Support, you don't need to PvP on this build. It's not necessary. Of course, racial skills, you want all of these. And then under Alchemy, you want medicinal use. This makes your potions last longer. Now, in terms of your champion points, CP setup is a little bit unique, of course, because this is a hybrid build. That means I basically have to split a lot in that blue tree. Let's look at the green tree first. 37 Warlord, 8 into Sprinter, 43 Healthy, 64 Arcanist, 64 Mooncalf, 37 Shadow Ward, and 16 into Tumbling. In the blue tree, this is where we'll start to see that split. Basically, as a hybrid build, just keep that in mind. You need to spread your points out a lot more than a standard build would need to. So I've got 15 into Blessed, 13 into Elfborn, 37 Elemental Expert, 16 Spell Erosion, 56 Master at Arms, 56 Thaumaturge, 18 Precise Strikes, 16 into Piercing, and 43 into Mighty. This is going to give us a nice damage spread across both magicka and stamina abilities. Of course, in the red tree, we want 72 into Ironclad. That's just going to help reduce all that damage coming in. 43 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 40 Thick-Skinned, and then 72 into Bastion. Now, Bastion, of course, buffs our damage shield, so things like Ice Heart, things like your damage shield enchant. We saw the Psijic Order damage shield when we block. All of those are getting buffed by 23%, so I think this is points well spent. Now, you don't have to spend 72. You can get a really good bonus just for doing like 20, I think it's 23 points, you get a 10% bonus. So even if you're not at max CP, put as many points as you can into here because it's really going to help your ability to solo. Now, last but not least, let's check out the outfit style on the build. I went with sort of that witch doctor theme on this setup. The head here is going to be the Keptu Horn Skull. That comes from Bloodroot Forge. The rest is just basically Mazatoon style. You have the Mazatoon light chest, light shoulders, light arms, and light feet. So that's how you get that kind of witch doctor style look on the build. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up the video for the solo hybrid Necromancer build. As usual, I'm going to end the video with some gameplay, so make sure you stick around for that if you're interested in seeing how the build performs and plays. Overall, I'd have to say this is probably one of my favorite hybrid builds that I've done so far. It's just a lot of fun to mix and match these skills, and the playstyle is really rewarding. And there's a lot you can accomplish with this build. Coming up soon, I should have a video, for example, where I solo every world boss in Somerset with this Necromancer build, so keep an eye out for that. Of course, I do have build videos for every other class in the game. If you want to see what a hybrid Templar, hybrid Nightblade, hybrid Dragon Knight, if you're interested in seeing how those work in the Elder Scrolls Online, then I'll have links for those in the description below. Make sure you check those out if you have not already, because they are a lot of fun as well. As always, if you enjoyed the video today, don't forget to crush that like button. It really helps out the channel, so I definitely appreciate that. If you have comments, if you have questions, suggestions about what type of build you want to see next, make sure you put those in the comment section below. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel because I do have weekly build videos, guides, and discussions right here on the channel. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video.